and a LinkedIn profile is going to stretch the hour we have. Consequently, as regards questions, and because I can't hear you, the fairest way of dealing with any questions you may have is if you rattle them into the chat facility that you have, then you should be able to pose any questions that you have, and then at the end of the session I'll let you know when we've done. Those that need to leave can leave. Those that want to listen for the remainder of the question, for the answers to the questions, irrespective of whether you've asked one or not, you're more than welcome to stay, and I'll literally deal with as many as I can. Normally I can get to answer all the questions, so that will be my aim. Okay, there's one or two people saying they can't see but they can hear, so what you should have on your screen, just as a double check, is a good evening slide announcing that this is a totally legal webinar, that it starts at 7:15, and that it's all about unlocking the secrets of how to write an interview-winning CV and LinkedIn profile. So that's what you should be able to see on the screen, with two pictures, me and a lady out just stretching her arm in a very friendly kind of introductory kind of a way. If you can't see that, then that's a bit of a problem. I'll just keep an eye on the question pane. If you can see that, great. If you've got a problem, just let me know, and there's not a lot I have to say I can do about it from this end. It tends to work or not work, but it would seem that most people can see what's going on. The backdrop to today, unsurprisingly, is all about how to pull together an effective CV and LinkedIn profile. We're going to major on the CV because a lot of what you do on the CV can be replicated if it's done properly onto LinkedIn. So we'll spend most of the time talking about the CV, and it will be in a legal context, although I do still have to plough a fairly wide trough to cover those from the early stages right the way through to the latter stages of their career. So I will be talking averages of averages, I guess, quite often. What I'll also be encouraging you to do is reflect on your own CVs as they currently stand, however you think it might be performing in the marketplace, or might perform in the marketplace if you're actually considering about getting into the marketplace and using your CV to apply for new jobs or more senior roles within your current organisation. There'll be a lot of questions that I'll be posing so that you can reflect and consider what you've currently got and how you're going to market. And that's quite an effective way of assessing whether your current tools, CV and LinkedIn being the prime ones, are up to spec or not, up to standard. Okay, just a few bits and pieces in terms of who on earth we are. We're a partner with Totally Legal, so in terms of the legal entities, as far as that's concerned, we're a separate business, CV and Interview Advisors. Unsurprisingly, we're here to provide CV writing, LinkedIn profile writing, interview coaching, career enhancement products and services to our clients, who are literally anybody interested in furthering their career. We tend to specialise in 3 or 4 main areas, that is legal, IT, and accounting/finance. That tends to be the biggest draw, and our partners reflect that. The important thing, not trying to big myself up, I'm afraid, but to hopefully give you confidence that what we're going to be talking about and covering this evening, we know works in the marketplace for a number of reasons. Part of that's down to the methodology, of course. Part of it's down to the people involved in the processes and their experience. And as far as my background is concerned, I've been an employer of people, a recruiter, both in the permanent and contract markets, at a reasonably senior level, a reviewer of CVs and a writer of CVs in my time, so for this organisation. So it's not just that we woke up one morning thinking it'd be a great idea to talk to people on a Wednesday evening about their CV and LinkedIn profile. It's actually quite important, I guess, that you see that we have seen the process from pretty much every angle you can imagine across all sectors at all levels. And even if we weren't that attentive, you soon pick up trends, what works, what doesn't. But we tend to hoover up all that data and use it to our advantage. So the rest of the team are similar. Interestingly, one of the skills that some of our writers have are that they're published authors in their own right. That will become important, as you'll see later. And there are going to be a few cliches banding around this evening, I'm afraid, because they're a good way of describing things, hot skills being one of them. And we know what the hot skills are in a particular marketplace. It's important you as an individual know what they are, or have a pretty good idea what they are, because you need them to craft an effective CV and to some degree an effective LinkedIn profile. And if you don't know what they are, you need to find them out, because your job will be a lot harder if you don't know what they are. Bottom line is, we're here to write and provide advice on how to pull together effective documents, your marketing collateral, if you like, that will ultimately secure you more interviews. Now, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what that constitutes, obviously how to go about that, but that's the bottom line. That, you know, there's no point in us existing or you improving or seeking to improve your CV and LinkedIn profile if it ultimately won't secure more interviews. So enough about us. Just a little bit of demonstrative evidence to prove that it works, and that is important. You know, it's very easy to talk about all these wonderful things. Loads of people, if you've ever Googled on the internet CV advice, you'll be there till Christmas, absorbing the information that's hurled in your general direction. And that's one of the problems, I'm afraid. Like many industries, very low barrier to entry. Everybody and their dog wants to give advice. You ask anybody about your CV, and I literally mean anybody, I'll guarantee they'll give you an opinion. The trick is trying to filter out whether they're qualified to give an opinion and whether that opinion would make the least bit difference to your success in the job market if you followed their advice. And that's a real issue. Good advice actually works in the marketplace is hard to find. And sometimes, frustratingly, the people you'd expect to have the good advice aren't those. So anyway, here's an email. I'm going to read it. You can see for yourselves that this is an extract from an email we got last month from somebody who attended one of our webinars. They were really struggling in the marketplace, fixed the problem, suddenly they get interviews, interest and attention. So it fundamentally does work. If you follow what we're going to talk about this evening and adopt even a proportion of the advice, it will make a material difference. Just a little bit more on that. At two levels, really, one of which is what kind of difference, because some people then say, okay, you say it's going to make a difference. A lot of people are out there looking for guarantees of success. I'm afraid you'll not get that from anybody. It might appear to be given. There's some companies out there offering to guarantee this, guarantee that. The ultimate bottom line of this is nobody can guarantee anything. All you can do is go to market with the strongest story at your disposal. If you do that, you will get more success than you're probably going to get if you don't do anything about your CV and LinkedIn profile. Because what I can virtually guarantee is that most people don't have the right document, the right message for the right audience, more of which later. On the subject of how much success can you imagine getting, or an increase in that success can you imagine getting in the job market if you were to sort your CV? Well, our stats point to a substantial double-digit increase, hence the fact at the bottom of the page. So 30 to 50% is the average we tend to see. So that's taking somebody's current CV, changing it, getting it into the marketplace, seeing what difference it makes. That's the average. There are some stratospheric achievements, some in the hundreds of percent increase, like that chap we saw earlier, who was really struggling in the marketplace, and some more modest increases for various reasons. But the average is in that sort of 30 to 50% band. But it is important, before you decide to do anything with your CV, you actually have some tools to judge whether you actually do need to do anything at all. Because there are some people out there who may not need to do anything. It's rare, but they do exist. So ask yourself these kind of questions. This applies particularly to people who are actively or about to be active in the job market, but they're equally valid to those people who think, okay, in the next 6, 9, 12 months I'm going to be active in the job market, I need to find something else, or I might be in a position where I have to find something else. Ask yourself these kind of questions because they'll give you some kind of steer on whether you do need to do anything or not, whether you're in, if you like, the red danger zone or the green happy days zone. And the first of those questions is, if you're going to market with essentially a document that just provides a list of things to your target audience, so literally just, here are the jobs I've done, here are the qualifications I've got, this is how you can get hold of me, my hobbies and interests are da 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 da. If that's all you're going to market with, that's a bad sign. Now, a lot of people say at this stage, or think, or could possibly be shouting down the phone right now, or down their microphones right now, well, what on earth is a CV if it's not a list of things? And to a very small degree, that's of course right, it is a list of things. But if that's all you're presenting your audience with, for reasons that will become clear shortly, that's not an effective way to go to market. The other good test of your CV is, particularly for people with a reasonable career under their belts, is if you're using a format, a structure of CV that's pretty much the same as when you left education at whatever level that may have been, and all you've done is add to it over time, that's a bad indicator as well. Again, it will become clear why later. This is harder because some people genuinely don't know what the hot skills are in the marketplace. The hot skills change and evolve over time. What was popular and relevant 20 years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago aren't necessarily so now. Which is why it's important to know what they are, because they do shift and evolve with time. But if you're not aligning your marketing document, your CV, to what the market is expecting to be interested and excited by, stands to reason you won't be as successful as you'd like. So if you're not clear on that, if you don't know what the hot skills are, unless you're very lucky, your CV will not be aligned to the hot skills. If you do know what the hot skills are and your CV is not really getting that message across, ditto. And although I've used these words already, again, another cliche, I'm afraid, target audience, it's really important these days. You will hear, I'm sure, from many that you've got to fine-tune your CV for different applications. To some degree, that is true, I'm afraid. But the critical issue here is that you've got to position your document to the target audience, and that target audience changes. That target audience is different depending on the jobs you're applying for, but typically it's either a recruiter, some form of intermediary, HR person, decision maker themselves within the employer, or any mix of those kind of folk. All have their slightly different needs and expectations. You can't necessarily address every single one of them, but the key ones you can on a CV, and you need to be doing that. Again, if you're not sure about that, it means you're probably not actually addressing the target audience, and most people don't. Again, we'll talk about that later. Ultimately, where this is leading is that our view on a CV is that rather than a list of things, you need to be presenting your target audience with a strong business case as to why they should bother interviewing you or consider interviewing you, much less hiring you. Remember, the CV's job is to get you the interview, the engagement, the phone call, the conversation, whatever it is, to progress your application. It's not the job to get you the job, and some people get mixed up with that. And if it's not strong enough to get you the interview, all of those wonderful things you really thought you're going to be able to explain at interview stage, you'll never get that opportunity. So we strongly believe, and it's been borne out by evidence in the marketplace, that if you're just going to the market with a list of things, that's bad, it won't be successful, and doesn't make a good CV. But if you've got a strong business case as to why somebody should be looking to interview you, you will be more successful, and you'll fit into that sort of 30 to 50% increase in getting interviews that I've talked about. We'll show later, I'll show later, what a business case actually is for those that are wondering what on earth that might be and how do you build a business case. Crudely, just think of anything you've bought recently, particularly high-ticket items, houses, cars, boats, if you're lucky enough. High-end stereos, if anybody buys those things these days, outbuildings, if you have any sheds, anything like that. It's unlikely you will have bought any of those things just by following a list or on a whim. So there's two angles to this. From you as a product or service to the marketplace, you're presenting a business case to the purchaser, the employer, or maybe via an intermediary, but essentially you're having to try and persuade somebody that you're valuable, valid, worthy of consideration. A bit like however you bought your shed, house, car, whatever. You will not probably have bought your car purely on the basis of somebody saying it's X meters long, Y meters wide, such and such tall, such and such an engine size, a list of just facts. Those facts will have been enhanced by some other features and benefits. You know, the colours, the shape, the running costs, the boot size, the performance, the whatever it is, it will have presented itself to you in the form of a business case. You might not have called it that. You might have been persuaded by a variety of means to buy the car, but you won't have just done it based on a list of things, or it's highly unlikely you would have done. Same with you as an employee, potential employee. Somebody's looking at you initially, figuratively on paper, on screen, and thinking, does what appears to me to be this individual or description of this individual excite me, make me think I want to meet this person because they might actually help contribute to our business in whatever fashion. If you're doing that, you stand a good chance of success. If you don't, or you're not doing that, you won't be as successful as you'd like. Again, virtually guaranteed. Okay, acid test, given all those facts, so again, very appropriate for those people currently in the marketplace or have been recently in the marketplace looking for jobs. And that is, and this advice sort of goes across everything that anybody will ever tell you about your CV. So it doesn't matter whether people say you've got a great CV, a bad CV, a mediocre CV, or anything in between. It doesn't matter. The acid test is if you're applying for jobs that you know you could perform based on the evidence available, and you're not getting interviews for those jobs, it's the CV that's the problem. In the vast majority of cases, there are very few exceptions to that. Now, some people, it's a very logical process, of course, this, and a very logical statement, but some people really have an issue with this because they assume there's all sorts of other things going on, because either, if they're not successful in getting interviews, they accept at face value what the recruiter's telling them, or the employer, if they're getting any feedback from that level. And the feedback might be, there are better people for the job. Okay, might be true. Sounds plausible. You are underqualified / overqualified, too experienced / underexperienced, all sorts of reasons that might seem plausible. But the harsh reality is, if you knew that you had a chance of performing that job based on the evidence at your disposal, as I say, that is critical, and you're not getting interviews for those jobs, it's because somebody somewhere doesn't like the message you're sending to them. And we'll see later, pretty much the only way they can judge you is the CV that you've sent. They may have checked you out on LinkedIn as well or via other means, but pretty much the only thing they can judge you on is what you've told them about yourself. So surprise, surprise, you get that message wrong, you will not be as successful as you'd like. And all of the other reasons that you hear, which sound plausible, are not really the harsh truth, which is your CV is not as compelling a story as you'd like it to be. Now, we'll look at ways of addressing that very shortly, but that's really important. For anybody active in the marketplace, you will have those stats. You'll know if you applied for 10 jobs, again, the caveat being they've got to be jobs you know you could perform, maybe at a stretch in fairness, but you could perform them, and you're not getting sufficient interviews for those 10 applications, there's something wrong with the CV. If you're in the lucky position of getting 7, 8, 9, 10 interviews out of the 10 applications, to be honest, happy days, all is well with the world. Your CV is doing the right job. But if you're in the 0, 1, 2, 3 interviews out of the 10 applications, it's pretty much the CV that's a problem. The grey area in between is then a case of you've got to make a judgment whether that's a satisfactory number of applications and interviews arising from those applications to get you a job offer. And if you don't think it is, and you've got to get more interviews, then again it points to getting the CV sorted and making that a more compelling message to your target audience. So absolutely key. So the most important message from this evening is building this business case, but a very important message this evening, if you're in the job market, is what do those stats tell you about the number of applications you're making and the interviews you're getting. For those people who aren't active in the marketplace, you can only surmise, you can only try and use what you're learning tonight. Hopefully you're learning something. So whatever you learn, you start to apply those methodologies, those thoughts to your current situation. Try and imagine where you are on the scale of, I think I've got a really strong business case, which means you've got an effective CV, or actually I'm missing it by a country mile and I do need to do something. Whatever, if you currently have a problem with that interview to application ratio, or you think you might have one, please do something about it. There are so many people we come across Like that poor chap I showed you the email from earlier. 3 years he'd spent banging his head against a brick wall, literally, trying to get people interested in him. He took it personally, unsurprisingly. Most people do. But remember that the recruiter or the employer, they probably don't know you from Adam. If they do, that's a bigger problem, another problem. But if they're judging you on the CV and they're not interviewing you, it's got nothing to do with you as an individual. Not a personal thing. It's just a business decision somebody's making. They don't like your advertisement for you as an individual. But you can do something about that. Most people can. So please, please do something. And assuming that you're in the I'm not getting any interviews, or I'm not getting as many interviews as I'd like category, as opposed to the actually I've not got a problem, I always get interviews, and from that I get job offers. You probably can go home early if you're in that camp. Most people aren't in that camp. So the options are you either do something yourself, and tonight will help you, or you get professional help, and we can help you. Let's look at the structure. Let's get into what makes a good CV then in the first instance. Well, there are a number of sections. What appears on screen now is what we would say is a good, effective structure for a CV in terms of the constituent parts, the sections that you should have. Now, as you'll see later, and I'll probably mention a number of times, don't worry about the headings at this stage. So if you don't have a CV with these headings, that doesn't mean to say you've got a bad CV. Headings are the least of your worry within reason. It's the content that's critical, absolutely critical. But this is a good structure. If you have these kind of sections on your CV with good, strong content in this order, it's helping to build a big, strong business case as to why somebody should be interviewing you. So it's the content drives everything, but the structure obviously helps. So we're going to delve into each of these sections to some degree, but it's the top 3 that are really critical and I'm going to spend most time on, because they're the areas that build this business case pretty much. Everything helps, but these 3 key areas, if you get them right, that will make the biggest difference. And if you get the content right within the sections, as I say, you will have a stronger business case. Okay, let's take these one at a time then. So I'm saying let's look at 3 sections particularly well. That's the professional executive summary, the opening statement that most people tend to have on their CVs. We'll talk about that shortly. Then we're going to go into these what I called key skills areas or areas of expertise. And then the third area is career highlights or notable cases for those that are practicing solicitors, for example. So let's take a look at these one by one. Now remember, the key thing here is we're building or starting to build the business case. This is what this is about. It's not about the qualifications you have per se or in isolation. It's not about your work history. That's going to come, but later. This is all about setting the scene as to why on earth somebody should be interviewing you or considering interviewing you. And the very first thing that your opening statement on your CV should have is some reflection of what exactly you are to the marketplace. So if you're a qualified solicitor, pretty much that's the first thing you're saying. If you're going for that kind of job, you want to reflect to your target audience what they're expecting to see for a valid, appropriate applicant. Number of reasons for this, and I'll show you some examples soon, both on screen, but also a sort of a live CV, as it were, so you can see how this all hangs together. The reason why this is so important is that even in a relatively specialist profession, you're still going to get lots of people applying for jobs that you're interested in who are in no way qualified to perform them. Not many people really grasp that concept. They assume wrongly that they're up against like-minded people from their peer group time and time again. So they tend to underestimate the number of people involved in the process and overestimate the quality of the competition. And by that I mean, as an average, you tend to think you're with your peer group. Now, when you ultimately get judged for the job, yes, of course you are. When the wheat's been sorted from the chaff, you will be within your peer group. But that initial stage of a job application process, you could be up against all sorts. And the trouble with a very poor CV is that you're probably going to get 5 to 20 seconds of somebody's time. Let's say 100 people have applied for a job. Sometimes it's a lot more, sometimes it's a bit less. But let's say 100 people have applied for the job you have. A good 25 to 35 probably are going to be complete time wasters. You'll not know that unless you're very pally with the recruiter or the employer. They're unlikely to tell you that because they'll be depressed about it. They've seen all these applications, got really excited, but the experienced recruiters will know lurking in there is a heap of poorly qualified individuals. I was going to be ruder than that, but need to be diplomatic. So there'll be people who shouldn't have applied, basically. Danger is if your CV is not compelling enough, if it's not well structured and doesn't have the appropriate content, it's dead easy for you to be bucketed with those invalid applicants and put in the proverbial waste bin, recycle bin, or whatever very quickly. And that's, a lot of people forget that or don't even realize it. They'll assume that the recruiter will sit down with a nice cup of coffee, study their CV at length, and then make an educated decision. If you've got 100 applicants to go through, that's the last thing that you'll do. You'll be desperately wanting to get the number down to a manageable chunk, and that means getting rid of people very quickly. So make it clear very quickly that you are pretty much a valid applicant. That's partly by reflecting exactly what they're looking for. So you generically say you are what they're looking for, if you can do that, or you quote your specific job title if it's not too random. You then follow that up quickly with the reason why you're on this earth at this moment in time. As I've sort of hinted at before, the employer is the purchaser of your services. You are the product or service, the solution to that employer's problem. They're going to want to spend an amount of money on getting the right individual into their business or organization. You are going to cost an amount of money to do that, of course. So you've got to give a pretty good indicator as to the return you're going to offer on that investment, and that's what we call your value proposition. So another, I think that's the third cliche of this evening, possibly fourth, but your value proposition is really key. What are you on this earth to do at this moment in time, and what kind of value can you bring to an organization if they were to employ you for whatever amount of money? I'll show you examples shortly. Linked to that are things you're particularly good at. Most people have a handful of things that they would probably claim are the real strength areas. Now, you need, of course, to mention those, but they need to be linked to these infamous hot skills. There's no point in saying, a stupid example, but you're particularly good at knitting jumpers when you're going for a legal role of some description at whatever level, because the two don't match. Okay, this crazy example, but you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised when you read CVs, and I read literally thousands of them every year, how badly aligned some people's CVs are. They talk about all the wonderful things they think are important, but are nowhere near close enough to what the employer is actually looking for. So don't get what you're good at and what you think you're good at and what you're, or maybe what you're interested in most. Don't get that confused with what the target audience is actually looking for and, excuse me, and what it places most value on. Those aren't necessarily the same things. So let's take a look at an example. Again, I'm not going to read this, you can see it for yourself. But the opening statement ought to be something like this. It's going to vary for everybody, of course, but the key thing is here. It doesn't matter what level you are, whether you've just graduated, just qualified, whether you've been in business for 25 years plus, or anything in between. It doesn't matter what level you're at. It doesn't matter what country you're working in. It doesn't matter which company or organization or practice you've been working for. Everybody, anywhere, can write something like this. And that is, what are you? So this person is a qualified solicitor with X number of years experience, and what's their value proposition? Well, it's particularly this a bit about specializing in crime. Then there's a list of key strengths that they have, and we're assuming, because we don't really know, we're assuming that they're aligning this with the hot skills in this particular marketplace. So this content's going to vary for everybody. You can't copy and paste it. You can't sort of imagine, okay, that's clear now necessarily. You've got to think about it. You've got to think, you know, what am I? That bit should be quite easy. Value proposition a bit harder. What are you particularly good at? Should be quite easy. Align it with the hot skills in the market, sometimes a bit harder. But you approach it like that, you'll build yourself a far more effective opening statement on your CV. Now, what most people tend to have on their CV, if you've got anything opening up word-wise, other than, of course, your name and contact details, most people tend to get some of this right, but then they confuse, as I said earlier, they confuse what the market's looking for with a whole bunch of behavioural stuff that you can't possibly prove on a CV. So, for example, if you've got anything referencing enthusiasm, commitment, dynamism, passion, ability to work in a team or as an individual, which is a classic and a particularly useless piece of information. And I'm sorry, that is quite controversial for those people who've got it on their CV, of which probably half of you will. It's useless information. Why is it useless? Because you can't prove any of that on your CV. And a lot of people think, yeah, but at interview I will show them how enthusiastic I am, and that magically I'll demonstrate how I can work in a team or as an individual. How on earth you can prove whether you can do those things on a CV, even to some degree at interview, I do not understand. So why put it on the CV? Recruiters don't like it, employers pull their hair out at it, but nobody ever tells you for fear of offending you, or very few people will tell you that. So that's really important. You'll notice that this statement on the screen right now has got nothing to do with enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, giving 110%, working in a team or as an individual, no behavioural traits at all. Everything in that statement could be proven on the CV by way of a number of methods, as we'll see later. And that's the key test. If your statement says anything, you better be able to prove it on your CV at some stage, or it fails the test and it shouldn't be in there. So I know I sound a little bit enthusiastic, if you wanted to use a diplomatic word again about this, but that's really important. And you'll probably now not be so much surprised, but my kind of view on this is that the CVs I tend to see, if I can copy and paste the text at the header of the CV, if you've got that kind of statement, a personal profile, a personal summary, whatever you've called it, it doesn't really matter. But if you've got that kind of wishy-washy statement at the top, and I could copy and paste it and stick it under my name and it still makes sense, that's a real problem. Not because I'm better than anybody out there, that's not the point. It's because I don't have the same qualifications as most of you will have. I don't have the same interests. I'm not targeting the same jobs and never would be able to, much less want to. So how would a piece of text that I can copy and paste off your CV and it would still make sense to me, I could still justify it, how could that possibly be right? And so it isn't, is the short answer. So it's got to be specific. What are you? What's your value proposition? What are you good at? And aligned to the hot skills in the marketplace, so that you can't just stick anybody's name at the top of it and it would make sense. Okay, that sort of sermon is over. That's the first part of the CV. The opening statement, it sets the scene. It's the first part of building a strong business case as to why somebody should be wanting to interview you. Before we look at a real-life CV, I'll show you and talk a little bit more about the second element, which we call key skills or areas of expertise. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it, it's the content that's key. And there are two real benefits of this section. One of which is presenting your target audience visually with a menu of skills that you've got. Again, technical or functional, not behavioural. So again, enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, passion, interpersonal skills, communication skills, any of that nonsense. It's not that those aren't valid skills, and so I should make this point. They are valuable skills to have. They're great attributes to have as an individual. My point is you cannot prove them on your CV. You can only start to prove them at interview. You will not get interviews if you layer your CV with all of this behavioural stuff, or you're much less likely to get them, I should say. So, better to present your target audience with something that's meaningful, that will help differentiate you and make you seem relevant for their needs. And you do that by presenting them with some bullet points, in effect, to reflect the skills that they are looking for. Now, in fairness, some jobs will say, we want people who are enthusiastic team players. Now, the mistake is, if you take that as read and think, well, yeah, well, I'm an enthusiastic team player, and put it on your CV, that's where this mistake tends to occur, because people think, well, I'm reflecting the skills they're looking for. The bit that you often don't see, unless you've employed people yourself, is that you don't judge people based on their CVs for enthusiasm and team playeriness. You judge that later on in the process, and you'll have a matrix that probably says that. These are the qualities we're going to seek. These are where we're going to assess those qualities. Some of them will be from the CV, things that can be proven. Some of them will be judged at interview. Some of them may be judged at assessment centre or some other part of the process. But enthusiasm will not be picked up from the CV, however many times you mention it. So visually, if you reflect technical and functional skills on your CV, that's a good thing to do. The second advantage in this digital world we live in is, of course, if you populate your CV with the right keywords and phrases, it will enhance the search engine optimization of your CV, the SEO bit for those that need to know what that acronym means. In effect, if you get the content sorted on your CV, you will appear more often in people's searches. So if you've not applied for a role directly, people have been searching for you on databases, job boards or whatever, you will pop up more often if you get the content well sorted and structured. So here are a few examples that we'd recommend having on a CV, if you can claim them, of course. They're only relevant if you can claim them and they're relevant to the job. So there's a few. Again, all functional or technical, not behavioural. And each one of those could be proven on the CV if you wanted to, and definitely could be proven through examples at interview. That's the important thing. Now, the other important thing, down lurking, and I've sort of hinted at this earlier, at the bottom of the slide, the vast majority, 92% allegedly, of recruiters and hiring managers make their interviewing decisions, the shortlisting decision, but basically on who to interview, based solely on the content of your CV. And again, most people think, yeah, okay, well, isn't that obvious? And that's the point. There is no other means that most recruiters and hirers can make a decision on who to interview apart from what you send them. So that's my point again. If you send them rubbish, you'll not get as many interviews, if any. If you send them good, compelling material, you'll get more interviews. Simple as that. There is no magic ball that they have. They can't gaze into this magic ball, crystal ball, and say, aha, well, I've got this CV, and now I can figure out that this person's actually really good because although they've not mentioned all of these important things, I can tell through my magic powers that they do in fact have them. And although that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, again, a lot of people assume that they're going to get this opportunity, or they'll assume that the recruiter will have some mystical powers that will give them information that doesn't appear on the CV, or that they'll be able to infer something that hasn't been made clear on the CV. None of that, I'm afraid, happens, of course, particularly in the 5 to 20 seconds you might have in that initial filtering process. So you get the content sorted, present a strong business case to your target audience, it will have the desired effect. If you don't get that right, you'll not perform as well as you'd like to in the job market. For those mathematicians amongst you, the 8% that makes the difference between 92 and 100 are those few cases where people may actually know you. They may actually already know you, so of course they wouldn't need to base the decision purely on the contents of your CV because they actually know what you're capable of, or your name's been given to somebody. So they're going on some kind of trusted advisor status. You know, Joe Bloggs recommends that we should meet up with you, therefore we're going to take their word. They're great. If you've got that advantage, so be it. But the vast majority of people are judged purely on their CV. Okay, I promised I'd show you an example of the CV to show you how it sort of fits together before we go into the third and arguably most important part of the document as far as the business case is concerned. So what you have appearing here, now this is Matt. Matt's the guy that runs our business, so for now I'm just showing you a fairly generic CV. The content's appropriate, but whoever CV I show you, it doesn't really matter. You can't do anything with the content other than say, okay, yeah, it seems to make sense. I'm really trying to give you an idea about how it structurally goes together and what it looks like on the page or on the screen when you get the content and the structure sorted. So what you should be able to see now is Matt's CV, got an exec summary opening statement. It's describing what he is, what's his value proposition, what's he good at, and we're assuming he's aligning that to the hot skills in his marketplace. And there's some bullet points which replicate functional or technical skills that he has. Again, we're assuming that they're aligned to the marketplace and they're just not a random list of things that Matt thought he was good at but have no relevance to the world. And then lurking at the bottom of the screen, which we haven't yet talked about, is an area called Career Highlights, which we'll come on to obviously very soon. So we've talked a lot about the CV, and yet we've covered barely a third of page 1. And that's deliberate. I did say I was going to focus on these first 3 sections. They do make or break your business case. It's quite often the case you will be judged and selected for interview by these areas alone, and somebody will have made up their mind positively or negatively by these areas alone and won't give the rest of the CV much attention necessarily. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that. So it is important and worth spending the time on. Okay, we'll come back to that later, and if we get a chance, I've got some more legal specific CVs, particularly for graduates who about now start to think, well, I don't have anything really to talk about because I've only just graduated or qualified, I should say. Therefore, what do I talk about? If there are any people with very little experience on board tonight, I'll talk a little bit about that later. Perhaps you want to ask a question about that, how that's handled, and I'll deal with that separately. As I say, we're going to be tight on time. So this third area, we've talked about 2 areas so far: opening statement, bullet-pointed key skills. The third area to build a business case is what we call career highlights. And for those that are practicing, notable cases might be a good use or good piece of terminology. And essentially what this is all about is the proof behind the claims made so far. So in your opening statement, you've said your value proposition is this, you're good at these things, and on the key skills, you've made a list of things that you believe you're strong at and that you have an ability with. But so far, if you were harsh about it, you could say, well, that all sounds very good. Where's the proof? And so this is a great area on the CV to provide that very proof, or at least an element of it. So this is why writing is a skill. If you struggle with being able to talk about either yourself or identifying what's important from your life and then articulating it well, it's probably one of those things where you should be thinking, okay, maybe I should get somebody else to do this on my behalf. But if you're good at writing and you can condense complicated events in your life into concise, meaningful content, then this is the area where you need to put that skill into practice. We suggest typically, there are some exceptions to the rule, but by and large, if you've got a career of any length, within reason, and within reason I mean probably at least a few months of doing something, and of course if you're practicing you'll have a fair few cases you'll have worked on, highlighting probably 3 highlights of your career or notable cases. Again, it's all very bespoke. It depends on your circumstance and situation, but as a guideline, that's what we probably point towards: 3 things. And those things, whatever they may be, cases or career highlights, we would then use a methodology to construct good content to feature on the CV. The methodology we use is called STAR. STAR stands for situation, task, actions, and result. Here is an example. Again, you can read it at your own leisure, but this is an event within a particular individual's experience. They've chosen to highlight it on their CV for argument's sake, and they've used the STAR methodology to construct a concise piece of text content to put on the CV. So it's not too little to leave people thinking, what on earth is that about and where's its relevance. It's not too much to send people over the edge in desperation at having to plow through a huge amount of text. It's just a nice, meaningful amount of information. The STAR methodology, the situation element of this paragraph is the first sentence. It's the background, the scene setter, if you like, the headline. The task is the responsibility resting on the shoulder of this individual who was apparently head of legal within a particular organisation. The actions are the bulk of the text, things that this individual did as head of legal to resolve this situation, whatever it may be, well, to in-source legal counsel. And then the result is the final sentence, started, succeeded in, and it's describing as a consequence of their actions whilst performing the task within the situation what the end result was or conclusion. Now again, within reason, it doesn't matter what level you're at or what kind of job you have or who you're working for or with. Most people can unearth this kind of evidence, so it's all relevant. You don't worry about, oh yeah, but I've, £2 million and £150,000 here and head of legal all sounds very senior. That's irrelevant if that's not your skill set, your experience. You pick stuff that's relevant, you target it to your market, and what are they looking for, and what have you got in your toolkit, and you make a match between the two. So the only exceptions where it's difficult to write this kind of stuff, of course, is you have no career at all. So you've recently qualified, just graduated, about to start your studies or whatever, then that takes a different approach, and you need to focus on competences that your employer may be looking for, which could have been demonstrated in ways outside of a traditional career. And again, if you recently qualified or just left university or something and you're interested in how to deal with that, we'll deal with that later if you want to ask a question. Okay, a few issues about career highlights or notable cases. Pick your examples well. Weak examples highlight failure. You'd be surprised for those people that get this bit right and they start to talk about something on their CV, about how they've been able to do something, they pick the wrong examples. They pick things that maybe they enjoyed the most. That doesn't mean to say it's the most relevant to your target audience, so be very careful about what you select. Linked to that, they have to be relevant and targeted. If they're not relevant, in effect, you're just saying to your target audience, yeah, I know you're looking for this, but actually I'd really like to talk about that. And it's like a bad date. If you don't pay attention to the person on the other side of the table, don't expect to have another date with them. And so that same rule applies. Not everybody can address this issue as impactfully as that example I gave. So if you've got examples that you can put figures against, a success against, almost a precedent against, great. But if you can't, if what you did was, what to you may seem as fairly menial and process driven, don't worry about it, because your target audience is probably looking to recruit somebody with that kind of expertise, awareness, experience. So it tends to be all relative. But of course, if you can pick examples with strong results, strong key performance indicators aligned against them, so much the better, but you don't have to. And when we're working with our clients, this is probably the area that takes the most time and is the most challenging. Most people are fairly modest. Lots of people don't know the value of what they've done and have forgotten some of what they've done, in truth be told. So we spend most of the time with clients that we're working with extracting from them in the nicest possible way examples of what they've done to demonstrate to the marketplace and to their target audience. It all depends on whether you think you're good at this kind of stuff and whether you can unearth this and then make the link between what's relevant and what's not. And if you think you're going to struggle in this kind of area, it starts to maybe point towards getting some help rather than battling away at yourself and making a hash of it. Okay, so let's briefly take another look at the CV just to show you, again, structurally how it works. I'll just reduce the size so we see all three sections now are on screen of, again, forget it's Matt's CV. If with the exception of recently qualified people, this kind of structure that you see on the screen now is pretty much the structure for most CVs that we write across any sector, and it's about building the business case. So of course the content will always change and be different, and for those currently practicing, career highlights might become notable cases. Apart from that, what you're looking at is pretty much the kind of look and feel we'd have on our clients' CVs. And roughly, therefore, is what you should be aiming for if you're going to be building a strong business case. So section 1 is this is who I am, this is what I can do, this is the value that I can offer in return for your investment into me as an individual. These are some of the things that I'm good at that are reflecting skills that I know damn well you're looking for, Mr. or Mrs. Employer. And here's the proof in the form of career highlights or notable cases to demonstrate my abilities in the areas that I've just told you I'm good at. Now, that, as I say, that builds a strong business case. If you've got what typically people have is either an ineffective opening statement, you could be harming yourself. If you are opening straight into education, that's not necessarily a strong differentiator. So that's not building a business case by leading with your education, even if you've got quite strong qualifications, or even if that's what you think is the only thing you've got to go with if you're recently qualified. Education is something that's shared by a lot of people these days, unfortunately. Awful lot of graduates out there, awful lot of 2-1 graduates, a fair few firsts. So that's not really a strong differentiator. So don't open with education. There are other ways of getting across that message within your CV if that is something you're truly proud of, and even if you are very well educated, have a very strong academic record, that there are different ways of dealing with that. Fundamentally, what you need to be getting across is a message that you are a strong candidate for the job in hand, and that's normally judged by other things that we've talked about so far. So get this section, get this part of the CV right, and it's a big step towards getting the kind of increments I suggested you'd get in terms of increased level of interviews. The other trick, and you'll probably notice this already, possibly, and mistake that people make is they jump straight into their career history, or they move into their career history too quickly. And again, that's not differentiating. Almost doesn't matter who you're working for, unless you're in the very upper echelons, working for an organisation, practice, or whatever, that is instantaneously recognisable as the gold standard in the marketplace. Unless you're at that level, heading straight into your career experience is not a differentiator and may send people's minds off in the totally wrong direction and is not building a business case for your interests. So you'll notice on Matt's CV here, and again, as I suggest, for most people's CVs that we tend to write, it's not until the bottom page 1 that we're going to be talking about where he's actually gained this experience, who's he been working for, and that would be pretty similar for, as I say, for most people's CVs that we write, irrespective of sector. So let's go into some of the other sections on the CV that are important, career history being one of them. So again, I reiterate, we don't jump straight into career history. It's not a big differentiator for most people. In some people's cases, it actually is the thing they least want to talk about, maybe because they made a bad move, or they're doing a job that's beneath them in the nicest possible way, i.e. maybe because of recessionary pressures they had to take a backward step. So then you certainly don't want to be leading with that on your CV. You need to be building the business case as to why somebody should be interested in you, and then getting around to telling people where you've gained that experience. So if you're not that comfortable with what you're currently doing or have done most recently, it's not the first thing people see on the CV. You work in reverse chronological order, so you start with the most recent or current role and work backwards. Most people do that, in fairness, but some surprisingly still don't. They start with the first thing and then work forwards, which is horrendous. And you should only provide reasonable detail for the last roughly 8 to 10 years of your career. That's, again, very bespoke to the individual, but as a broad indicator, detail for the last 8 to 10 years, everything else we'll touch on shortly, minimise. Within the detail of your the roles that you've had across the last 8 to 10 years, you should have some duties and responsibilities, but not many. Again, they're not differentiating. Most people share duties and responsibilities for similar levels of roles. So going to market with that as a message about all the things that you were expected to do and were paid to do is not helping your cause. If you dump your job description in there, in effect, that's not a good starting point. But you need a bit. You need to give some people an idea about what you were paid to do. Far more effectively, of course, though, is you back that up with actual achievements. So what did you do with those duties and responsibilities that make you a little bit different, that people can assess you for and think, okay, this is an individual. They're not just a sort of a clone of somebody else's CV that I've just seen. And here's the proof through achievements or, again, notable cases if that applies. As I hinted at, the earlier career element, and I'll show you Matt's CV again in a minute, should be just reducing all of the stuff that's more than 10 years old to a line. You're highly unlikely to be getting interviews based on what happened in the 90s, certainly the 80s, and God forbid the 70s. Not because, what I'm not saying is it's not that that experience is irrelevant, it's just that it isn't the thing that's going to get you an interview. In most cases, i.e. 99.9% of the time. So don't focus time on it. So if you've got a CV that's describing it at some length what you got up to in 1992, or in fact any time up until now, roughly the turn of the millennium is a good indicator. You certainly don't want to be detailing stuff that happened any earlier than that. And as time marches on, of course, you just draw the line further and further up your experience. And when I say just one line for each role, I literally mean date from, date to, employer, title, that's it. Of course, you should have reference to qualifications and any continual professional development or such like. We tend to put that towards the back of the CV, interestingly, not the front, because the reasons I've described, it's not differentiated for most people. So even if you've graduated or fairly recently, or you're about to graduate, you don't really want to be leading with that as the key part of the information. That's not going to help your cause. If you've just qualified, again, it's not the differentiator. There are other ways of getting that message across briefly, like saying a recently qualified or a part qualified or qualified to a certain level within your professional summary. There are ways of getting the message of your academic achievement and professional education or professional training standard across without going into the detail. Leave the detail until later on in the CV. Ditto personal details. Sharp-eyed of those here tonight will have noticed that Matt's CV has his name at the top and then 2 contact numbers. So we'd recommend name and either mobile home or home email or mobile email or some combination of those things, and that's it. Number of reasons for that, which I won't go into all the detail, we don't have time, but they largely revolve around don't be in a postcode lottery for jobs, and that can happen. So don't let people make a decision based on where you live affect whether you're a valid candidate for the role, on the assumption that you'll only have applied for roles that you actually believe you're capable of performing geographically or otherwise. Don't let somebody else make that decision for you. Plus, it's taking up space. Where you live is not a differentiating feature, or very unlikely to be. So move all that stuff to the back of the CV. Most people have another controversial aspect. This is most people have on their CV something akin to references available on request. It's not that that's the crime of the century, in fairness. It doesn't take up a huge amount of space, but it is totally irrelevant if you ask yourself or think about it. What on earth does references available on request mean? Well, it's a bad habit. It's sort of passed around from person to person, up and down family trees, I'm sure. People see it, just assume it's the right thing to do. Some people even say you should do it, but don't explain why. And there is no reason, unless you're specifically asked and requested to provide information about references as part of the application process. It's not going to help you get an interview. Most people don't ask for that information because they know damn well they will seek references whether you have them or not at an appropriate time in the application process, normally far later in the process. So to get you an interview, there's no point in mentioning references available on request unless you've been asked for them, and then of course you have to give the details. Far more relevant is put some recommendations or testimonial evidence on your CV. People who are prepared to put words to support your abilities in the marketplace. Now that could have been pinched from LinkedIn, more of which very shortly, or it could be from appraisals, emails, all sorts of sources that you might have got that evidence from. But if it's relevant and powerful enough, then it's worth putting on the CV. And then finally, again, a bit controversial this one, hobbies and interests. We tend to say don't put them. Don't put anything on your CV that could lead people to think something different from that which you'd like them to think. Again, slightly tongue-in-cheek. I'm not a football supporter, but I know enough about it that if a couple of seasons ago you'd have said you're an ardent Manchester City fan, and the CV would have landed on the desk as somebody who's an ardent Manchester United fan, it would have conjured up an impression. Who knows what it would have. It shouldn't make the blindest bit of difference, of course, but there are examples where you can rub people up the wrong way, or you can create a picture in somebody's mind that you are something that you're actually not by a very innocent statement. So whatever the truth behind that, however crazy that may seem, don't give people evidence for them to create a picture in their mind about you that isn't true or that doesn't help you get an interview. Slightly more relevant is listing a whole load of pursuits that are insular or judged to be insular by somebody, whether they are or not doesn't really matter, that may harm your case, your business case. So be very careful. We tend to recommend only putting hobbies and interests on your CV if they materially help build a business case as to why somebody should interview you, and that's quite rare. Okay. Brief moment of reflection. Well, firstly, let's take a look at Matt's CV and see where we get to with some of the things I've just talked about. So we've dealt with the sort of career history bit a little bit there. As a rule of thumb, it is important still to have it on page 1 of your CV. So you're seeing on the screen at the moment, bottom of page 1 of Matt's CV, starts his career history. He's explaining who he works for, of course, a little bit about who he works for. That's really important, actually. Don't don't assume people know who on earth you work for, and don't even assume, even if you work for a big branded company, don't assume that everybody will know which part you work for, or which element or specialization it might be involved with. So we always recommend explaining a little bit about who on earth your company and employer is, and sort of size, scope, scale, that kind of information is important. If we move on to, now you're looking at, or shortly we'll be looking at the top of page 2 of the CV, you can see there's quite a lot of detail about what he's been doing most recently. That's the most important thing. That's what he'll be judged on. So unless you've had a very brief last role, i.e. months rather than years, you really want to be providing quite an amount of information. There's a mix of scene setting, but balanced with achievements or possibly notable cases for those that are practicing. That kind of level of information. Down the bottom of page 2 is then another employer. Now this CV is a bit old, so we're dipping into the 90s here, but if Matt were to rewrite this, he'd probably reduce this element now to a much less text. But if you had a role that sort of took you into the noughties, then again you detail that, a bit of an explanation, a bit of information about it, and then finally page 3, the final page of Matt's CV, you can see that he's finishing off explaining his penultimate role, detail-wise. Then his earlier career is just a line, from to, employer, job description, qualifications, education, personal details, and then some recommendations, as I hinted at. They can be really powerful. If you've got good testimonial evidence, really useful to have on the CV. So that's broadly how it fits together. And therefore, what we've just covered as far as the CV is concerned, you should be able to now ask yourself some questions and get some decent answers and start to picture what's going to happen if you're not in the marketplace, what's going to happen when you get there, and if you are in the marketplace, maybe you understand why it's not going as well as you might have imagined, if that's true. So first question is, are you getting the interviews you deserve? If you're active in the marketplace, that's an easy one to answer. It's a yay or nay. Does your CV meet the acid test? That's the, okay, if you're getting any interviews at all out of a number of applications, you can work out the rough percentage. The more applications you make, the more accurate the percentage will become. But if that's quite low, i.e. lower than 50%, I can virtually guarantee somebody somewhere is not liking what you're sending them, which is telling you something. The reason why you're probably not as successful as you'd like to be, if that's the case, it's got nothing to do with your performance or abilities as an individual. It's not a personal thing. It is entirely down to the fact that whoever's reading your CV doesn't find it compelling enough. It's not building a strong business case. So you'll know that. For those that are about to go into the job market, then you've got to take a bit of a judgment call on whether you think you're there or not. And as soon as you get into the job market, you'll find out pretty quickly whether you've got a strong business case. And if you've not built a business case, it's because there isn't the relevant evidence of your success. So if you've got a CV right now that isn't demonstrating to your target audience the things you're capable of doing, you don't have a business case, or you don't have a strong business case at least. So then you can make a decision. For those, and it is only those people that are happy with the success rate they're getting, you probably don't need to do anything, in fairness. If you're getting a reasonable number of interviews and you're happy with that, then you should continue whatever you're doing, because that's good. Definition of happy is entirely in your court. I'd say anything over 7 out of 10, i.e. 70% hit rate on applications to interviews to applications, then that's a pretty strong indicator of success. It'd be hard to materially improve on that. But most people aren't in that camp, and so second option is you've got to do something. You could do it yourself, following the guidelines given tonight. Option 3, get some help. And if that's where you're beginning to head, stick around until we talked about LinkedIn, and there's some great discounts that Totally Legal have twisted our arm to provide, which will ease the burden financially. More importantly, give you a much better CV. Okay, just a few general bits and pieces. I'm only going to mention actually 2 things here because we need to get into LinkedIn and wrap up fairly quickly. So it'll become apparent that writing style is important. If you're not good at writing, you find it frustrating writing a CV, then cut your losses, get somebody to help you. It'll be so much easier, I promise you that much. Spelling, instant rejection for most people, irrespective of how good you are as an individual. If there's spelling or grammatical errors on your CV, recruiter is going to get into no trouble at all if they cite that as a reason why you got rejected. I still, probably roughly 15 to 20% of the CVs that I see have some kind of fairly hideous mistake on them. And finally, number of pages, bit of an urban myth this. Some people will say you must have a CV that's X pages long. There's no real evidence to support that unless, and the exception to this is, if you have been specifically asked to submit an application on X number of pages, you should of course aim to do that. Otherwise, what's the point? So if people, it's rare, but if people say it's got to be a page, it's got to be 2 pages or whatever, adhere. Other than that, there is no real rule of thumb, and it is a myth for people to say it's got to be 2 pages. And they're not actually stating it. There's no evidence to support that at all. Most CVs we write for our clients are probably 3 pages long, truth be told, and then we've never had anybody come back and say, you bunch of so-and-sos, you've given me a 3-page document, the market demands 2 pages, I want my money back. That just doesn't happen. What people are wound up about is the rubbish content on most people's CVs, irrespective of whether it's 1, 2, 10, 12 pages long. And that's got misinterpreted along the way. So number of pages is not a big issue within reason. 2, 3, even 4 pages, if it's good content, will work. Okay, let's talk about LinkedIn very quickly because I'm now overrunning, and I apologize, but I hope you're getting something out of this. LinkedIn is quite important depending on where you're at in the market and what you're trying to do. The comment at the bottom of this slide is quite important as well because it reinforces this fact about there are 2 key drivers as to why people get selected for interview. It's still the case that the CV is the key driver, although that emphasis is shifting. And for those people that get selected for interview, then there's a process that people are put through before making the final judgment. And increasingly, that's sussing people out on LinkedIn, and I dare say other social media platforms as well. They're out with tonight's discussion, partly because they're things like Facebook and Twitter, and they're far more personal, but they can cause an awful lot of problems if you misbehave in speech marks. So the point here is that of the people, remember that vast majority of recruiters and hiring managers that will judge you purely on the contents of your CV, 92%. Of that, the vast majority will then check you out on LinkedIn before inviting you to interview. So if you've got a disconnect between the 2 media, you've got a problem. If you're saying one thing and another thing, CV and LinkedIn profile, you've got a problem. And so be very careful about the messages you're sending because it will get picked up these days. LinkedIn as a tool is very important if you're looking for new opportunities for a whole host of reasons I won't go into, but there's the obvious ones, which are you're visible, you can be searched, you can be found, people can contact you purely as a result of looking at your profile and being interested. Equally, they can discard you and reject you without you ever knowing because they didn't like what they saw in your profile, so it's important. It's important also for people who are not just looking for stuff now, opportunity-wise, but who are trying to build a presence and a profile for the future. So work invested now in getting it right and sorted will pay big time at some point down the road. And again, you don't want to be in a situation where you're reactive, think, I need to get active in the job market, I'll get on LinkedIn, I'll get on other social media, I'll start making a song and a dance, because that shows you cannot possibly gain as much traction if you suddenly try and jump on LinkedIn and make it work for you. It doesn't happen like that. You've got to be on there, build a profile, build contacts, build relationships over time, and then that will pay dividends. It's like you're making an investment for future realization. But it is different from your CV. There are elements which are the same. you're still trying to build a business case, but the way you do that is actually, if you do it effectively, is quite different from the content on your CV. So for those that have just dumped their CV on LinkedIn, two issues, one of which that's not the smartest thing to do, however much LinkedIn might encourage you to do it, but if you've got a poor or underperforming CV, you've just replicated that badness, if such a thing could be said. So again, ask yourself the question, if that's what you've done, it's a sort of a warning sign. LinkedIn will encourage you, if you've been on LinkedIn and you've trying to set up your profile, or set up your profile and you thought that was the easy, no problem, don't get sucked into the more content you put on LinkedIn, the better your profile will be, which unfortunately LinkedIn will score you higher the more content you hurl in its general direction, unsurprisingly I suppose, because they like more information about you. Don't worry about that, or worry less about that. The content is key. So in that regard, it's similar to the CV. Content is everything. Good content, doesn't matter how little or much of it, it will work its magic. Bad content, opposite is true. There are a few areas, again, I'm just going to touch on very briefly, I promise. It literally is nowhere near as much detail as we talked about the CV, because the principles are similar. So there's some areas, again, you need to get right to make LinkedIn work better for you and more effectively. If you've got any questions about this, ask later, because I'm going to skim over it. But the professional headline, which is the bit of text that appears under your name, really important you get that right. Not I'm available, I'm looking, and not the default setting, which happens to be a combination of your current or most recent job title and your employer. The reason why is because that's not necessarily the most differentiating statement to make about yourself. That's just a fact. It's not really actually selling you. Show you that shortly. And underneath that is the summary. So that's the block of text that appears under the header being your photo if you have one, your name, professional headline, a bit about where you're based and what sector you work within. Underneath that then there's a summary, which is like the introductory text about you. Those two things are pretty important. Again, get them right and people will start to be interested in you more. To show you a brief example on the screen now, again, keep consistent, it's Matt's profile. The professional headline is the area that I've ovaled in red, starting MD and career hunter. In effect, this is Matt's value proposition that we talked about earlier. So his real thing is that he can drive success in the job market. So he's not just saying I'm MD at CV and Interview Advisors, which is wholly meaningless, except to him and people that know him. He's describing the value he can bring. So that's a subtle difference, and you'd be surprised how much of a difference that can make when you're being judged against all the other people that a recruiter may be looking at. The summary is the text highlighted again in red oval. Different from the CV, Matt's writing in a different tense now. Again, don't have the time to go into why. This is why it's different for LinkedIn versus CV. Different tense, different style. It's a more open style. You can do a lot more on LinkedIn. You can take a much broader approach. But it is important that you get this bit right as well. So a bit about the what is he, what's he good at, what's his value proposition, and linking it to a market that's receptive to what he's got to offer. When you're putting your positions or your jobs into LinkedIn, just summaries, don't detail. So it's nowhere near as much detail as it would be on a CV. Again, for a number of reasons I won't go into, but you just need to summarize. You don't need to give warts and all. Again, misnomer here. Lots of people go around and say, well, you need to put as much as you can into LinkedIn. It actually doesn't help your cause in the majority of cases. You just want people to be hooked by something. A brief summary will do, lead people to want to ask you more and engage with you. And then I've talked about the professional headline being one very important area, the summary being another important area, and the third area, so a bit like the CV, there's three key areas to get sorted on your profile to build a business case. Third area is projects. Not a lot of people know that this area exists, and fairly few people use it. I'll show you where it is. If you go into your LinkedIn profile, if you have one, and you go into the edit mode, and you'll see a screen a bit like my one, and there's an area called projects somewhere down the right-hand side in edit mode, and you click on projects, and you'll get a screen like this. And this is where you can put your career highlights or notable cases. And you give the highlight or case a name, quite punchy. Again, this is where the writing skills come into play, something that will attract the eye, bit of a headline, a cross between a sort of tabloid and a broadsheet headline here, really. So it's not as dramatic as somebody ate my hamster, but not as sort of boring as inflation's up or inflation's down. It's something in the middle. You know, it attracts the eye. You can link that project to an occupation that you've had if you've populated LinkedIn with your various roles, and then you provide the text. And this bit you can almost take from the CV. So you can take a career highlight or a notable case and dump it straight in here. Then that will appear on your profile, and again helps to give people the evidence that they're after. Obviously, you tweak and amend depending on any sensitivities or names or situations. So you have to make a decision about which ones to include and what content can be mentioned, because you're obviously being viewed potentially by tens, hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. But you make that decision at the time. Then finally, as far as LinkedIn is concerned, all of the sections, if you're familiar with your profile, can be reordered within reason. So there is a better order to get your business case sorted than LinkedIn's default settings. So it's all drag and drop. You grab hold of a section with your mouse, you cart it somewhere else, you drop it, it repositions it. There's a more effective way of going about it. It's not, again, it's not a big deal, but it helps make a difference. And if we were writing the profile for you, we'd be doing that as part of the process. So that's pretty much it on the content side. Now you should be at a stage where you're thinking, okay, could do this myself, no problem, might need professional help. Briefly, because I promised this good deal end to things, if you're thinking about getting help, the process, just so you understand it, and this is the bit that's relevant for people thinking I really can't be bothered, or I need help because I don't really know what I'm doing. I know I'm not doing it right. I've got that evidence, or I fear that I'm going to get that evidence. Therefore, I need help. If we're involved in that process, then we can rewrite your CV and LinkedIn profile from scratch. You know, we don't amend things. We don't tweak things. That's almost impossible to do. Just out of interest, you have to start from scratch and rebuild both, starting with a CV. We work with our clients, so if you're interested in this, we basically have a lengthy conversation over the telephone or Skype with you and extract from you in the nicest possible way all the data we need to clarify what on earth you're trying to do and sanity check that, if you like. Work out what your value proposition is, and it sounds a bit crude to some people and mercenary, but you are a brand, you're a product or a service to the marketplace. You have to view yourself as such and then position accordingly. We can help you with that. Work out where your real value-added skills are and whether they truly are aligned to the marketplace, and build up the achievements or notable cases. In effect, then build this business case for you. So we're gathering all the data that allows us to then rewrite the content on your CV and then ultimately your LinkedIn profile to build a stronger business case. And one thing I can virtually guarantee, there are no absolute 100% cast iron guarantees, I'm afraid, but the stats prove it time and time again. If you have a stronger business case, you will secure more interviews, and it will secure interviews to, in speech marks, better jobs, i.e. if you're trying to elevate yourself and you've struggled to take yourself from one level to another level, and you know damn well you could perform at that higher level, you'd be amazed just by adjusting the message you're sending out to your target audience, what a difference that can make. So another stat we track is how much extra money have people have been able to secure as a consequence of going to market with an improved CV. And it's funny, I said earlier the interview success rate was hovering between the 30 to 50% increase. The salary increase stats are a £3,000 to £5,000 increment. It can be that much of a difference. It's really quite surprising. So if you under those facts, you can do the maths. You can then figure out, is this worth considering investing my money and time in or not, as the case may be. And so finally, in terms of what we can do for you, if you're interested in that approach, ordinarily to write a CV for anybody with a reasonable amount of experience, i.e. sort of 5 to 7 years career doing something, would cost $299 for the CV, 50 quid for the LinkedIn profile plus VAT. We're totally legal. We've reduced that substantially, but it is a time-limited deal. So we've reduced that to $275 plus VAT. So that you get a brand new CV, brand new reconstructed LinkedIn profile. Whether you have one or not, you'll get a profile. We'll construct it from scratch if we have to. So you save a lot of money on the deal overall. It is time limited to close of play Monday, next Monday, the 17th. And you need to go visit that website if you're interested in that, which I'll copy and paste shortly into your chat room facility so you can actually lift it and use it. I would say to people, two things that happen normally. We get some orders where people want to move reasonably quickly, and that's fine. We'll just take them and prioritize them as they come in. But some people want to buy and take advantage of the offer and then park it for a period of time. We've had one case recently where they parked it for 12 months, which is a bit extreme. I'm not really sure why they'd want to do that, but they did. But if you wanted to buy the offer and then not use it for a month, 2 months, 3 months, that's fine. That's up to you. As long as we know, you're not forcing yourself into a time process. So the deal is time limited in terms of agreeing to it and taking advantage of it, but not when you execute it. For the first 10 customers of that package, and it is strictly first come, first served, you'll also get a free cover letter and access to our online interview coaching system, which is a really nifty piece of kit to practice interview questions in the privacy of your own home, but really useful. That's worth another 100 odd quid, just under 100 quid. So, but that's strictly for the first 10 customers. And what I'll do is I will, whilst we're trying to multitask, copy and paste that link into the chat room facility, and then you hopefully can lift it from there. Okay, and then to whoever's just asked that last question, Amanda, forgive me, I'm just about to abuse your question with a visible to all answer, which is that web link, just in case you can only see it from there. Okay, so that's the deal. Alternatively, if you're interested in having a go yourself, you can buy a relatively cheap package off our website using that same link for 18 quid including the VAT, which is like a post-webinar pack. So you get some templates, a workbook, some help on interviews. It gives you a bit of a toe in the water, really. Some people then go down that route, have a go themselves. And I'd say some people are quite good at it. Again, they've got the right skill set. Some people think, my God, I still need help. And if you come back to us, we'll still put together some kind of deal for you. So there's catered for everybody, really, other than the people that have decided that they don't need any help. You can do it yourself, modest cost, invest in your LinkedIn profile and CV for at least a discounted rate. We know it's quite a lot of money, but I'm afraid there's a lot of work that goes into it. You have to look at it as an investment in the future rather than a horrible unnecessary cost. Please don't look at it as like if your dishwasher's just exploded, because you'll never get around that if you think of it like that. And then we're done. So for those that need to disappear, I thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that relevant and useful. I do apologise we overran somewhat, but a lot of content to go over. I'll now move on to the questions. So if you bear with me just a short while, I'm going to